This week's parsha, we talk about the encounter of Yaakov Avinu and Esav. So let's discuss a little bit about Esav. There are many remazim in Chazal that connect Esav, who's also known as Edom, with Rome. For example, in Parshas Toldos, in the bracha that Yaakov Avinu gave Esav, the pasuk says, "Hinei mishmanei haaretz hiya moshavecha," that your dwelling shall be from the fatness of the earth. The Rashi brings from the Medrash Rabbah that this refers to Italia shel Yavan. This refers to Italy. That Esav was given the bracha to receive Italy. And Rashi in this week's parsha, in the end of the parsha, when it lists the alufim of Esav, lists the nobles of Esav, one of the alufim is called Aluf Magdiel. The aluf of Magdiel. So Rashi says, Zeroimi. This is Rome. So apparently there's an association of Esav, Edom, with Rome. The truth is, in Midrashim, we find this keseder all the time. Now, there are many Midrashim that refer to the Arba Malchias, the four kingdoms that enslaved Yisrael. Of course, the last of the four kingdoms is the Roman Empire. They destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. So we would expect that the Arba Malchias should be listed as Bavel, Madai, Yavan, and Roimi. But consistently in the Midrashim, the four Malchias are listed as Bavel, Madai, Yavan, and Edom. So it seems that Edom somehow is connected to Roimi, to Rome. Now the Ben Ezra in Parshas Toldos points out that this association is problematic because Edom and Rome are two opposite ends of the world. Edom is southeast of Eretz Yisrael. Rome is quite a distance to the west of Eretz Yisrael. And furthermore, the people aren't of the same stock. As Edom, Esav, really comes from Shem. As Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov were descendants of Shem. Esav, of course, is Yaakov's twin brother. So Edom really is a Semitic people. They come from Shem. Who are the Romans? So there's a pasuk which refers to the Romans in Parshas Balak. In the last speech of Balak, when he tells Bilam the course of history in the future, there's a pasuk which says, "Vitzim miyat kitim, v'inu ashur v'inu aver," that ships will come from the place of the Kitim, and they will torment Ashur and torment Aver, which in this context means the Jews, the Ivrim. So who are these Kitim? Who are these Kitim? So Unkelus, on that pasuk, Vitzim Miat Kitim, ships will come from the land of the Kitim. Unkelus is Matargim Romoi. The Kitim are the Romans. Now what do we know about the Kitim? Who are the Kitim? So if we go back to Parshas Noach, it says that Yefes had a son named Yavan, and one of Yavan's children was named Kitim. So the Kitim were descendants, grandchildren of Yefes. So to identify Edom with Rome is problematic, because Edom, Esav, is really from Shem, and the Kitim, who are the Romans, really are from Yefes. So how do you explain this connection? Now the Barbanel writes, in a Sefer Mashmiya Yeshua, he writes like this, that if you study the ancient history of Rome, you discover that the first king of the region, even before the establishment of the city of Rome by Romulus and Remus, but the first king of the region was named Janus. Janus was a very successful king. Ultimately, he became a deity. They turned him into a god. He was the god of doorways, of entrances and exits. That's why he's depicted as having two faces, and that's why the month January is named after him, because it's the beginning of the new year and the end of the old year. But in any case, the human Janus was the first king of the region. And no one knows exactly where he came from. He was not from the native stock. He came somewhere from the east. That's what the Roman histories say. So the Rabbi Eliezer writes, we have a Kabbalah that this Janus was actually a grandson of Esav. He was Sifo, the son of Eliphaz, the son of Esav. There's such a Kabbalah. And he was the first king of the region of Italy, where Rome was later established by Romulus and Remus. And therefore the Abarbanel says that the identification of Rome with Edom is because although the population, the people of Rome, were the Kitim, which were from Bnei Yefes, but their kings were descendants of Esav from the Bnei Shem. So you had the population from Yefes, but the kings were from Esav. And that's why the whole area came to be known as Edom. It's interesting that Barbanel writes in many places in his parish in Nevi'im that many of the Nevuas that talk about the downfall of Edom really don't refer to Edom adjacent to Eretz Yisrael, actually refer to Rome. Just to give one illustration, and this week's Haftarah is from the book of Ovadia, which is a single chapter which talks about the downfall of Edom. And the last verse in the parak is very famous. It says, Va'olo Moshiach Bahar Tzion, that saviors will ascend Har Tzion, Lishpotes Har Esav, to rule over the mountain of Esav, V'haisal Hashem HaMelucha, and kingdom will be God's. So it says that the saviors of Har Tzion will establish dominion over Har Esav. What does Har Esav refer to? Says the Barbanel, it refers to Rome. Har Esav is Rome. But it doesn't refer to Petra, which was the capital of Edom, southeast of Eretz Yisrael. It refers to the city of Rome, the Vatican. And it refers to the fact that in Yemos Mashiach, the Klal Yisrael will establish dominion over Rome. So it's very interesting. So the association of Rome with Edom, Har Esav, says the Barbanel, was although the population was from the Bnei Yefes, but their kings, their leadership, came from Edom. This is the Barbanel's pshat. The Barbanel brings a Ramban. The Ramban is in the Sefer HaGeula. The Ramban says a different pshat. The Ramban says a very interesting thing. The first of the nations of the world to embrace Christianity, says the Ramban, were Bnei Esav, were Bnei Edom. The Ramban says this as a fact. The Rambam writes the same fact in the Igeres Taimon, that the first of the Umas Ha'olam to embrace Christianity, if you know a little bit of Christian history, you know that Yeshu HaNotzri himself had no intention of establishing a ministry to the Gentiles. Because he came to address the lost sheep of Israel. But his followers established a mission. This really was among the Chalukei Deis between Paul and Peter. But Peter actually began a ministry to the Gentiles, and he established his church in Rome. That's why the main church of the Vatican is St. Peter's Basilica, because Peter established the church in Rome. So he established this, but the first nation of the Umas Ha'olam to accept Christianity actually was Edom, from the Bnei Esav. And ultimately, it spread from Edom west, until it ultimately reached Rome. And because of that, Rome came to be known as Edom. Because the religion, which ultimately was embraced by Rome and became, under Constantine, the state religion of the Roman Empire, really was a religion which was first established in Edom. And that's the connection of Edom to Rome. This is what the Ramban says. Also a very interesting thing. The Ibn Ezra himself, who asks the question, veers away from Chazal. And the Ibn Ezra says no. That in fact, it's a mistake, it's a misnomer, and the current Golus is the Golus of Roimi, and it should not be called the Golus Edom, despite the fact that in dozens of Midrashim it's referred as Golus Edom. But the Ibn Ezra says it's a misnomer. How did it come to pass? How did such a thing begin? So this is a very interesting thing. There's a pasuk in Tehillim which says, in the capital of Al Naharas Babel, which commemorates the Churban Bayis Rishon. So it says, Zachar Hashem livnei Edom, remember Hashem to take revenge against the Bnei Edom, Eis Yom Yerushalayim, the day of Yerushalayim, Ha'omrim Aru Adi Yesod Bo, the day on which they said, destroy until you reach the very foundation. So what is that pasuk referring to? So the Medrash Tehillim says that it refers to the Churban Bayis Sheni. In other words, the Bayis Rishon was destroyed by the people of Babel, but the Bayis Sheni was destroyed by the Bnei Edom, the Romans. Again, this connection of Rome to Edom, and therefore David HaMelech says that Hashem should remember what the Romans did and bring punishment upon them. The Abarbanel says the Ibn Ezra says that's not Pshat. The Pshat is like this. The Pshat is, it's referring to the Churban Bayis Rishon. That when the Babylonians destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash, so Edom, which was a neighbor of Eretz Yisrael, was so overjoyed that they rejoiced at the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash. They rejoiced when the Babylonians destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash. And this rubbed the Jews the wrong way, to the extent that they were more bothered by the rejoicing of the Edomim than they were bothered by the destruction itself. Because what the Babylonians did to them was not as hurtful as the fact that the people of Edom rejoiced. So therefore they davened to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Zechar Hashem livnei Edom v'asiyom Yerushalayim. Remember, Hashem, how the Bnei Edom rejoiced and they encouraged the Babylonians to destroy more and dig deeper until you destroy the very foundations of the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore they davened first that Hashem should punish the Bnei Edom, and only in the next pasuk they davened that Bas Babel Hashduda Ashri Sheshalem Lach, that Bas Babel, who is to be despoiled, happy is the one who takes revenge against you. That's a hard thing to understand. In Pshuto Shel Mikra, many of the Mefarshim follow the Ibn Ezra, because to say that it's a reference to the Churban Bayis Sheni is a little difficult. Within the context, all the psukim before and after are referring to the Churban Bayis Rishon. So in Pshat, the Ibn Ezra's approach is reasonable. The only question is, why should it be that way? Because you have the Babylonians who actually brought about the Churban. On the other hand, you have the Edomim who are rejoicing. Like, why should it be that the Bnei Yisrael are more upset about the rejoicing of Edom than the Churban that the Bnei Babel accomplished? But Al Kapanim, we have these various shitas. So we have to understand, what is the connection of Edom to Christianity? In other words, this fact that the Ramban and the Rambam in the Geras Taimon write that the first nation to accept Christianity was Rome, what is the cheshbon? Why should it be that Christianity has such an appeal to them, and from them it spread to Rome? But it started with Edom. What's the connection? Let's put all those questions on the back burner, and let's talk about a little bit about the parsha. It says in the pasuk that when Esav and Yaakov finally met, it says that they embraced Vayishlach, and Esav kissed Yaakov. So in the Sefer Torah, on the word Vayishlach, there are nakudas, there are dots. And we know that dots normally come to be mima'et, to reduce the mashmos, the implication of a word. So Rashi brings two pshatim. One pshat is that yes, Esav kissed Yaakov, but he didn't kiss him b'chol liba, he didn't kiss him wholeheartedly. Meaning Esav still harbored resentment against Yaakov, so he kissed him, but it wasn't wholeheartedly. The other opinion says that he did kiss him wholeheartedly. But that opinion introduces his opinion by stating emphatically, B'yodua shehalacha she'esav shayne es Yaakov. It's a known fact, it's a halacha, it's like a law, it's inviolate, it can't be broken, that Esav hates Yaakov. But on this one occasion, nichmeru rachamov, his mercy was aroused, after he saw the way in which Yaakov tried to appease him, and therefore he kissed him, at this moment he kissed him b'chol libo, with all his heart. It doesn't mean to say that he fell in love with Yaakov. It means on this one occasion, for a moment, he was so moved that he kissed him wholeheartedly. But avada, it didn't last, and it's a halach, it's a law, that Esav sonayes Yaakov. So it seems like this, that l'chol hadayis, Esav does not like Yaakov. Like the first day, even when he kissed him, was not wholehearted, and even according to the second day that he kissed him wholeheartedly, it was only momentary. Only that moment he kissed him wholeheartedly, but afterward it reverts back to the halacha she'esav sonayes Yaakov. So we have to assume, maybe we all take for granted that Esav hates Yaakov. No, the truth is, this really was the meaning of the encounter that Yaakov had the night before with the Malach. Chazal say that Malach was the sorrow shel Esav. It was the guardian angel of Esav. And they had a fight in which the angel tried to defeat him. And the Ramban explains that this is a remez to what Esav's descendants would try to do to Yaakov's descendants in the Darchei shel Shema, in the generation of forced conversions. So the remez was, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, they will ultimately survive, but Esav will inflict injuries upon you. And that's the idea that in this encounter, yes, Yaakov was victorious, but he left limping. Solei al Yerecha. And the Sefer HaChinuch brings the same idea, that that's what the fight with the angel alludes to. The Sefer HaChinuch is written in the mitzvah of the prohibition of eating Gid HaNoshim. But in any case, that's the significance. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving Yaakov a preview. You should know that whatever happens tomorrow, even if it seems that Esav kisses you, even if he ends up kissing you wholeheartedly, you should know this is only momentary. But in reality, Esav is bent on destroying you, and in Darchei shel Shema he'll try. There's a divine promise that you'll survive, but he will inflict injuries upon you. So basically, Esav does not like Yaakov. That's what we should assume. So in light of that, we have a very problematic halacha in the Torah. If you look in Parshas Ki Seitzei, there's a pasuk in the Torah which says, Lo sisa'ed Edomi, you should not scorn a convert from Edom, ki achichahu, because he's your brother. And therefore the pasuk says that a grandchild of a convert from Edom is allowed to marry into the fold. Dor shlishi yavalav b'chal Hashem. The third generation can marry into the fold. But it says, Lo sisa'ed Edomi, don't scorn an Edomi, ki achichahu, he's your brother. And brothers like that, like as the saying goes, friends like that, who needs enemies? I mean, the Torah is saying that we should accept converts from Esav because Esav is our brother. I mean, this is the brother who's out to destroy us, who hates us. It's a halacha that Esav sonayes Yaakov. So, like, that is a justification. That's why we should accept him, because he's a brother. It's hard to understand. Now it's very interesting that there is a branch of the family that we're not meant to accept, which of course is Amalek. Because Amalek is not the totality of Esav. Amalek is a branch, a very small branch of the family. Eliphaz who was the son of Esav, had 6 children. 5 of them were by a full-fledged wife. The 6th was a child he had with the Pilegesh. So this is V'timna Haisa Pilegesh, the Eliphaz ben Esav. Timna was the Pilegesh, the concubine of Eliphaz. And with Timna, Eliphaz had a child named Amalek. So this was the 6th child, and he was really a step lower, because the first 5 were full-fledged children he had with a full-fledged wife. The 6th was a child of a Pilegesh. That was Amalek. Of course, Amalek and his people attacked the Bnei Yisrael in the Midbar, and as a result of that, it was decreed that Timcha Zecher Amalek, they are to be wiped out totally. The Mechilta says in the end of Parshas Vayishlach that we don't accept Gerim from Amalek. That even if a person from Amalek wishes to convert and thereby escape annihilation, it doesn't work because Ein Makabel Gerim from Amalek. We don't accept Gerim from Amalek. So it seems we have a very interesting thing. Esav, on the one hand, we say the family overall, no society of Edomi, we shouldn't scorn them, we shouldn't reject them, we should look at them as brothers in some way. We certainly accept Gerim. The grandchildren of the Gerim can even marry into the fold. And Amalek, on the other hand, we say that nothing doing, Timcha Zecher Amalek, and we're not Makabel Gevrim from them. Now, one could say that there is no fundamental difference except the Esav's hatred did not translate itself into action, whereas Amalek's hatred did. Amalek attacked us in the Midbar when we were defenseless, and accordingly, that's why there's a greater sanction imposed on Amalek than on the rest of the family of Esav. But it's interesting to note that the Gemara in Sanhedrin and Sadi Tes says that the hatred of Amalek for Klal Yisrael does not come from his father's side. It doesn't come from Eliphaz and Esav. It comes from his mother's side. Very interesting Gemara. The Gemara says that it says in the pasuk, "The Timna Haisa Pilegesh." Timna was the concubine of Eliphaz. So the Gemara asks a question. I mean, the Torah had nothing more important to teach us than the name of his concubine. Like, we need to know that. So the Gemara gives us the background that Timna was a Bas Malachim. She was a princess. She was related to Seir HaChayri. These were the people that were native to the land that Esav later conquered. And she was a princess. And when she became aware of the beautiful family of Avram, Yitzchak, she wanted to convert. She wanted to join. And she came, she presented herself to be accepted in the house of Avram, Yitzchak. And they rejected her, probably for good cause. She didn't meet the admission standards. So she said that better I should be a Pilegesh to the black sheep of the family than to have no connection at all. And therefore she willingly gave herself to be a concubine to Eliphaz, who was the son of Esav. So the Gemara says, from that match, Eliphaz and Timna, came Amalek. So the Gemara says that why does Amalek hate Klal Yisrael? Because they shouldn't have distanced her. Now, there was a taina that Avram and Yitzchak should not have sent her away, and that's why she had a hatred for Klal Yisrael, which she transmitted to her child. So it seems from the Gemara is telling us an amazing thing, that the hatred of Amalek for Yisrael is not something which Amalek receives from his father and grandfather, from Eliphaz and from Esav. It was something that he received from his mother, from Timnah. And that undoubtedly is really the difference between the rest of Edom and Amalek. In other words, the hatred of Amalek is unmitigated because it comes from a stranger. Timnah was a stranger. And some of the hatred of Esav is mitigated because Esav is, after all, said and done a brother. That's the difference. In other words, why does Esav hate us? Esav hates us because Esav hates Yaakov, but Esav is a brother to Yaakov. So therefore, we can be more accepting. Whereas why does Amalek hate us? Amalek hates us not because of Esav. Amalek hates us because his mother was Timnah. She had her own grievance against Klal Yisrael. Well, she's a total outsider, and therefore there is no mitigating factor, and therefore the Torah says, don't accept Gerim, and Timcha Zecher Amalek wiped out totally. We have to understand, why does this difference make a difference? Because why is there a difference whether the hatred is from Esav's side, or whether the Esav is from Timnah's side? In the beginning of the parsha, when Yaakov Avinu davens to Hashem that he be spared from Esav, he says, Hatzileni na miyad achim miyad Esav. Save me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esav, which is an apparent redundancy. He could have said either Hatzileni na miyad achi, save me from my brother, or he could have said, save me from Esav. The Zohar HaKadosh says on these words that from here you see that when you daven, you have to specify exactly what you're asking for. You see, Yaakov was very specific. He didn't just say one or the other, he said both. But it isn't clear what is the point. Because what is the meaning of this redundancy that the Zohar says, from here you see that you should specify what you mean. So Beis Halevi writes like this. Beis Halevi says that Esav is dangerous in one of two ways. We have Esav coming with Arba Meosish, with 400 armed men, who are determined to slaughter. That's one type of danger that Esav poses. Esav coming as an enemy who wants to kill, wipe us out. Lo Yizach Hashem Yisrael, that Klal Yisrael should disappear. There's another danger. Esav comes as a brother. Comes as a brother. He wants to embrace us. He wants to befriend us. But the embrace of Esav has its own dangers. Yaakov Avinu had no idea exactly how Esav was going to come. Therefore, as the Zohar HaKadosh says, he specified in his tefillah all the possibilities. So first he said, Hatzileinu miyadach, he saved me from my brother. Meaning if Esav is coming as a brother, save me from that. And if he's coming as an enemy, then miyad Esav, save me from that. Says the Beis Halevi, in fact, as the story unfolds, you see that both were true. Because Esav initially came with 400 armed men, so obviously his initial intention was violent. I mean, you don't come with 400 armed men just to say hello. So obviously Esav's initial intention was to be violent. But you find that when Esav arrived, something happened. Maybe he saw Yaakov and his emotions were aroused, and all of a sudden he kisses Yaakov, whether it's wholeheartedly or not wholeheartedly. But he kisses Yaakov, and he's very gracious. He says, "Vayomer nisav v'nelcha ve'echol negdecha." He says, "Let's travel together. Let's travel together." And the Medrash says on those words that Esav said, "Let's make a partnership." Because why should we have a situation where you have only Olam Haba and I have only Olam Hazeh? Let's make a partnership and we'll split. Each of us will have half of Olam Hazeh and half of Olam Haba. It'll be a beautiful partnership. And Yaakov had to use all his diplomacy and all his tact to extricate himself from this situation, because he understood that a partnership with Esav meant great danger, great spiritual danger, if not physical danger as well. So you see that Esav in this parsha came in both ways. The Beis Levi goes on to explain that we know, as Ramban says throughout Chumash Bereshis, that Ma'isa Avasim Lebanim, Ma'isa Avasim Lebanim, and we know that in fact when Klal Yisrael finds itself in Golus, there are two different modes of relationship. Sometimes we are tormented, persecuted, we are the victims of pogroms and attacks. That's Esav coming as an enemy. And sometimes we are embraced by the societies in which we live, and we have emancipation, and doors are opened, and we tend to fall into that trap of thinking that everything is fine, everything is wonderful, and we're at peace, and we should accept all the offers. But in reality, that even be more dangerous. I think that I've said before, the famous Maisa, that when Russia and France, at the time of Napoleon, were engaged in war, so the Gedolei Yisrael were divided. Who to support the Tsar or to support Napoleon? There are many Gedolei Yisrael supported Napoleon, because the reality was that the Tsars were terrible anti-Semites, and Napoleon began offering rights to the Jews. The Balatanya supported the Tsar. And Balatanya wrote in a famous letter, he said that if Napoleon wins, it'll be very, very good for the Jews materially, but very, very bad for the Jews spiritually. If the Tsar wins, it'll be very, very bad for the Jews materially, but it'll be very, very good for the Jews spiritually. So Balatanya held that better that the Tsar's side should win, because ultimately Ruchnius is more important than Gashmius. But Al Kapanim, we find that there are two ways in which we relate. Sometimes the masters attack us, and sometimes they befriend us. The truth is, it's even more subtle than that. When we talk about the experience of Klal Yisrael in Christian countries, we know there were times there were forced conversions. There were attempts to coerce us to embrace Christianity. But the truth is that Christianity in its very essence is really a religion which tries to break down the barriers between Klal Yisrael and the Umas Ha'olam. Fundamentally, it's not a religion which is designed to attack the Jews. It's a religion which tries to break down the barriers. What do I mean? What is the essential Nakuda, the essential point of Christianity? As we know, that Klal Yisrael was selected, Atav V'chartanu Mikol Ha'amim, and we are the chosen people. When the disciples of Yeshu and Notzvi spread the good news to the Umas Ha'olam, the message they were sending was that Yisrael was rejected by the Ribbono Shel Olam. That for their sins, first and foremost among them, the unwillingness to accept Yeshu and Notzvi, they were rejected. And the new Israel will be comprised of the people who embrace Christianity, who accept Yeshu and Notzvi, who have faith, and so on and so forth. And the tactic is an amazing tactic, because until the advent of Christianity, all the nations that opposed Klal Yisrael either did it with attempts to physically destroy us, or attempts to undermine, refute our religion. That we understand. What the Umas Ha'olam that embraced Christianity tried to do is really to take over and say, we are the true Israel. So the New Testament is not a sacred work which stands in opposition to the Old Testament. It's considered an expansion, a further development, an enhancement. The Old Testament still has validity. In other words, what the Umas Ha'olam are saying is that Christianity is a outgrowth, it's a development, it's an advancement of Judaism, but we are the new Israel, not the old Israel. They were rejected. We're the new Israel. The Ramchal in the Sefer Das Tvunas uses the expression kesef mimos, that the Jews were a silver that became disgusting, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu threw us out and instead embraced those who accept Christianity. That was the essence of Christianity. The statement that Ono Yisrael, we are the true Jews. We are the true Jews. And therefore, in reality, it should not be antagonistic to Judaism. Because if Jews would be willing to embrace it, we would become one people. Now, the antagonism of Christianity to Judaism is because the Jews were resistant. The Jews said, no, Yeshu and Notzvi is not the Mashiach, he is not a Navi, and therefore, if you refuse to believe what we believe in, then we may attack you. We may try to coerce you. But the fundamental tenets of Christianity would allow for the embrace of the old Yisrael too. Just accept our faith, and we can be one people. That really is Esav coming as a brother. So if we refuse his entreaties, then he may come as an enemy. But in theory, Esav coming as a brother really is actually the fundamental essence of what Christianity is all about. And it could be that that's really why Christianity established its first foothold among the Bnei Edom. Because why is that? Because what is the grievance, what is the hatred that Edom harbors in his heart? And the fact that Yaakov was selected and Esav was rejected. And Esav would like nothing better than to turn back the clock and say, let's go back to the way it was. Let's be mevatel that selection of Klal Yisrael, and let's be together. Let us all be the nation of Israel, so to speak, under one creed. And therefore, to the extent that Christianity allowed for that possibility, it was something that was attractive specifically to the Bnei Esav. And hence the Ramban and the Rambam say that the first nation to embrace Christianity was Edom. From there it spread and ultimately reached Rome. There are certain things that as a consequence of this very deep she'ifa of Esav, irk him to no end. Whereas anything which is symbolic of a Jewish exclusivity is specifically distasteful to Esav. So let's ask ourselves, what are the various things that are symbolic of Jewish exclusivity? The first, of course, would be the Beis HaMikdash. Right? The Beis HaMikdash is a place where we believe this is the Makom Hashras Hashchina for the entire world. This is the place where Hashpah and influence spreads to the entire world. Now, this is something, and it's in our place, it's in our territory, in Yerushalayim. Whereas it's something which is specifically Jewish. So to the Bnei Esav, to the Bnei Edom, who see this as counter to their desire to become partners with us, to reject Jewish exclusivity, the Beis HaMikdash is very distasteful. So therefore, when the Babylonians destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, when they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, the truth is, when you read the parsha, it is a total political thing. It has nothing to do with religion. Because the Babylonians were pagans, and it is well known there were no religious wars until monotheism spread. Because among the pagans, if you have room for 20 gods, you have room for 21 gods. There's no, the more the merrier. So on religious grounds, there would have been no reason for Bavel to destroy the Beis HaMikdash. Why did they destroy the Beis HaMikdash? Because they were conquering the land, and they had to show who's boss. So how do you assert your authority? You destroy the thing which is most precious to the native population. If this is the most precious thing that you possess, the Beis HaMikdash, we'll show you that we're in charge, we're going to destroy it. But it's like, don't take anything personal, it's only business. We have nothing against your religion. It's just, we just have to show you that we're in charge, and therefore this is the most precious thing, we'll take that from you. So the Jews were not terribly insulted by the fact that the Babylonians destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. This is just the way of conquering nations. When you conquer a nation, you have to crush them. So it means destroying the Beis HaMikdash, destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. But who rejoiced? Who really celebrated the Churban Beis HaMikdash? It was the Bnei Edom, right? Because to them, this was the bittul, this was the destruction of the symbol of Jewish exclusivity. So they said, Aru ad Yesodba, says, tear it down further. As far as Bavel was concerned, they didn't have to tear it down to the very foundations. They had nothing against it. Okay, once we destroyed it, we destroyed it. Well, we have to raise it down to the rock bottom foundation. Says, but to Esav, the Beis HaMikdash were so abhorrent, so they said, Aru ad Yesodba. And therefore, when Klal Yisrael davens to Ribono Shel Olam to take revenge against the destroyers of the Beis HaMikdash, they were more upset, more hurt by what Edom did than what even Bavel did. So first they daven Zechar Hashem L'Bnei Edom, remember to punish Bnei Edom, and only after that they daven that Bas Bavel Hashiduda, that Hashem should punish the Bnei Bavel. Now what's the other symbol of Jewish exclusivity? It's the Torah. It's the Torah. And the interesting thing is that what Christianity tried to do, as we said, is they took the Torah and they made it their own. And this is alluded to in a very interesting medrash. The medrash says like this, that we know that there was a time that Talmai, the Hellenist king of the Egyptians, commissioned a Greek translation of the Torah. Chazal say that when that translation was written, there were 3 days of darkness descended upon the world. 3 days of darkness descended upon the world. And the question is that why? So there's a Greek translation. So what? We have an art school translation. What is so important about the Greek translation? So the Medrash says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu foresaw that if the Torah is translated into Greek, the time would come, much later in Jewish history, that people would come from the Umas Olam and say, Anu Yisrael, that we are the Jews. In other words, the ability of the Umas Olam to make the claim that Anu Yisrael was a direct result of the translation of the Torah into Greek. And it didn't happen at that time. It happened hundreds of years later. But that's why darkness descended on the world when that translation was written, because it was that Greek translation which was ma'afsher, which made possible the Umas Olam, the Christians, to say Ono Yisrael. Of course, the New Testament was written in Greek. So this was the language that the church fathers used. And the fact that the Old Testament had been translated into Greek made it possible to assert a claim over it. The Medrash says that this is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't have the Torah Shebaal Peh written down. Because if the Torah Shebaal Peh would have been written down, that also would have been translated into Greek, and then they would have had everything. So as it is, the Torah Shebaal Peh remains firmly in our possession. But this is what the Medrash says. This was the idea. In other words, the Torah, which is also the symbol of Jewish exclusivity, because of its translation into Greek, this is how they were able to usurp it. And just as a remiss to all this is a very interesting tour. The Torah says in Hilchas Tainus, brings from the Halachas Gedolos, which brings from the Megillas Tainus, there are certain days on which it's appropriate to fast. We don't fast on all of these days. Some of them are obligatory, but it's appropriate to fast on these days. So it says in the Halachas Gedolos that a person should fast on the 8th, 9th, and 10th days of Teves. That's what it says. The 8th, 9th, and 10th days of Teves. We only fast on the 10th. This is why. So the halakha is like this. The 8th of Teves, this was the day that the Torah was translated into Greek. It's a historical fact that the completion of the translation of the Torah into Greek was on the 8th day of Teves. So that's a day, it's a calamity, it's appropriate to fast. The 9th day of Teves, says the halakha, we don't know what happened. We don't know what happened. And Asar B'Teves, we know, was when the Nebuchadnezzar besieged Yerushalayim, which was the beginning of the process of the Churban. But the 9th of Teves, we don't know. So in the new edition of the Torah, there's a Haggadah that quotes from the Perush to the Megillas Tainus that is printed in the Vilna edition, that says that there's a Kabbalah that on the 9th of Teves, that is when Yeshu HaNotzri was born. He was born on the 9th of Teves. And the reason they didn't want to publicize this fact is because you can imagine that all we need is that the Umas Olam should find out that we are fasting because we see that day as a calamity, and therefore that's why it was concealed. But that's really what happened on the 9th of Teves. So the three events were the writing of the Torah in Greek, the birth of Yeshu HaNotzri, and finally on the 10th of Teves, which is the beginning of the process of Churban with the besieging of Yerushalayim and Nebuchadnezzar. The question is, what's the connection of these three things? It's exactly that. In other words, the fundamental thing is the obliteration of the barrier between Yisrael and Umas Olam. It's the bittul of Jewish exclusivity. Right? That is the agenda of the religion that the followers of Yeshu HaNotzri established. So now it manifests itself in other areas. Number one, which is the idea of translating the Torah in Greek, which enables them to usurp the Torah as theirs, and also the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, which again is the breakdown of that symbol of Jewish exclusivity. But this is the idea. This is what Edom was trying to do. Edom was trying to turn the clock back, right? The brachas and the selling of the Bukhara should have established for all time the selection of Yaakov and the rejection of Esav. Esav wants to turn the clock back, and that really is at the root of his embrace of Christianity, and that of course ultimately spreads to Rome, hence the identification of Esav with Rome. I think that's the pshat in the pasuk. The difference between the hatred of Amalek and the hatred of Esav is really like this. The hatred of Esav is a very bitter hatred. The hatred of brothers is probably the worst hatred. But at the root of it is that Esav admires something that we have. There is something that we have. We possess the special relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. We possess the Torah. We possess the Beis Hamikdash. When we possess things that on some level Esav yearns for, you'd think that Esav wouldn't yearn for those things. Esav is the hunter. Esav is the outdoorsman. Esav is the balavera. But the truth is, if he really felt as he talks, like he said in Pashas told us, I'm going to die, Lomos Li Bechora, why don't we need the Bechora? Rashi says the Bechora is the right to do the Avod in the Beis HaMikdash. I don't need that. If he really believed that, then he wouldn't be jealous. Because Yaakov would just tell him, listen, says, you didn't want it anyway, so I have it, what do you care? And fine. Esav was, I don't want it, so let's not fight. But the point is that on some level, Esav is, after all said and done, a son of Avraham and Yitzchak. And therefore, on some level, there is a yearning for the spirituality which is the possession of Yaakov. Okay, he has a heart for other things too. Right, but there is something deep down Esav that also aspires and wants and yearns for something. So therefore the Torah says that he's not worthless. But he's not to be destroyed. Right? Fakert, he comes to Megayer, you accept him, but you certainly won't destroy him. But you only destroy things that have no value. Right? Something that you can use, you don't destroy. Right? Something that has value, you don't destroy. Right? The psak for Amalek is Timcha Zecha Amalek because there's nothing there. It's worthless. So the world is better off without them. In the case of Esav, we don't make such a psak. Because Esav is, after all, something your brother. As despicable as his actions are, but deep down he is your brother. There is a spiritual yearning, and therefore he's spared. And if someone wants to be Mizgayer, we accept him as a ger, and ultimately we allow him to enter the fold. And that's the idea. Of course, it's not that he's deserving of such great respect because of his brotherly love, how he treats us like a brother. He doesn't treat us like a brother at all. Right? The idea of his being a brother is that we do share something in common, and therefore we can't be machlit, we can't decide that he's absolutely worthless and to be rejected. On the other hand, Amalek, right? Amalek's hatred doesn't come from the jealousy that he wants to be part of us. There was once rejected, Timnah says, I want nothing to do with them. And this is how she raised her son, Amalek. So therefore, on that, the Torah gives a psak, Timcha Zecha Amalek. There's nothing worthwhile there, there's nothing to be spared, there's no possibility of a conversion, he's never going to change, and therefore the only psak is Timcha, to wipe them out, absolutely. But this is really a Parshas Vayishlach, which introduces Esav, and these are the issues that we're going to grapple with until the end of days. Until there'll be V'olam Moshiyim B'Hartzion L'Shpatzar Esav, V'Haisel Hashem Hamlucha. Until then, there'll be this tension between the world of Christianity and the world of Judaism, fighting over exactly who is the chosen people. Is it Klal Yisrael, or is it the community of believers in the tenets of Christianity? We pointed out in the past, one of the famous words of the Rambam that were censored from most editions of the Rambam, but reprinted in newer editions. And the Rambam writes that you wonder, after all said and done, HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. So why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow Christianity to develop? And he writes, because Christianity actually performed a very valuable service in weaning the entire world away from paganism. In other words, if Klal Yisrael would have tried, with its pure monotheism, to reach out to the pagan world, wouldn't have been successful. In other words, if we go to the pagans and say we believe in one God who is invisible, intangible, and so on and so forth, reject your belief in many gods that can be touched and felt, they wouldn't be able to relate to us. Our beliefs are too outlandish by comparison to theirs. But Christianity, precisely because it's an impure form of monotheism, it believes in the idea that the Spirit of God can become incarnate in the body of a human being. It was something that the Ummah Ha'olam could embrace. So they were weaned away from polytheism to an imperfect form of monotheism, and ultimately, having given up most of their false beliefs, they will ultimately be shown by Melech HaMashiach, Eliyahu HaNavi, the absolute truth, and it'll be easier for them to accept. So the Rambam writes that Christianity performed a public service that brought us closer, which means essentially this: that when Mashiach comes, it's not just that the Moshiach B'Har Tzion will rule over Har Esav, but in a sense, the Har Esav will actually hand the crown over to the Melech HaMashiach. That the efforts, all that took place in Har Esav, will ultimately contribute to the end result, which is Vayishlach Hashem Hamlucha, that kingship will be HaKadosh Baruch Hu's alone.